All right, and we're live. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Steve. Steve works with Security Scorecard, and we're going to have an amazing conversation for you today. Steve is one of those leaders that, even though you haven't known them for a while, but when you talk to them, you can kind of get a feel for their level of authenticity and vulnerability. So you guys are going to enjoy this conversation today. And on that note, welcome in, Steve. Welcome in.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. I look forward to the conversation. You mentioned it would be relaxed and conversational. That's right up my alley. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so Steve, so let's talk a little bit about like how you started in cybersecurity. What led you to your journey in cybersecurity?
Interestingly enough, I actually went to college for uh, pre-med. So I was going to be an anesthesiologist. I was interested in going into the medical field. I spent the entire last half of my high school career going through, in our area, what we called an honors medical program, where I was able to shadow anesthesiologists and surgeons in the hospital for a full year. And so, but I always had technology kind of behind the scenes. I played games a lot. I did video games, games on the computers. I built computers. It was always a real interest to me. And so when I got to college and started my coursework in the biology field and doing pre-med, always really strong chemistry. I hated biology though. And I learned that I hated the other aspects that required you to be a really strong student uh, for the medical field. And it just so happened, turn of events at that time, I had started a small company in high school where I was advising people on technology, computers, that sort of thing. I was doing some recycling. Now this is way back in the early 90s, right? So it's a different time, right, than where we're at today. Um, but people were buying computers in those days, mainly from big retail stores, Walmart, other places were their first computers, and they needed service, so they needed help adding components and that sort of thing. And I did that stuff. And it so happened while I was in college, I had the opportunity to do some of that work as part of my business again. And so I fell back into that. I actually withdrew from college and kind of focused on my technology business and grew it pretty successfully. And so I always had a passion and a curiosity about technology. I was always involved in it. You know, my hobbies led into my career, which I think is really a great thing for people to consider, because I speak to so many people and mentor so many people who are looking to go in the cybersecurity industry, either right out of school or maybe even a career change, because they see the opportunities from a compensation perspective. And I don't, and many times they don't consider what's required from an investment standpoint and continuous learning. You know, it's an always on type of role. You and I talked about it before we started here, Evie, about, you know, it's a chaos and kind of turmoil every day. And it's just the nature of the business, right? Many times people aren't aware of that. And so um, I'm passionate about it, though. I love it. You know, I got started really hands-on in technology, turning screws, and back in the cybersecurity days where SneakerNet was a thing, and that's the way viruses got transmitted. You know, having to combat that and cleaning floppy drives. If nobody knows what a floppy drive is, you can go look that up. Um, but that's kind of my background, and that's where I became passionate about technology. The other thing that led to it was, even in the early days, when people were hit with a virus attack or some type of security incident, what I realized was how personal this was to people, even in a business, right? When it hit, even a business is very personal to the leadership of that business and the people that work there. And I got a sense of, I think, satisfaction from helping people in those situations, mainly because I had access to knowledge and skill set that they didn't, and I knew I could move that the knowledge forward and move a solution forward for them to get them out of a place where they were, you know, struggling, not happy. It was an issue for them, and so that's the other side of the coin for me, was just, you know, trying to help people overcome the challenges and issues they face in the cybersecurity industry.
Amazing. And I just see, this is why I like to have chats like this. I would have never guessed that you would have a pre-med background.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That is
I
so.
was passionate about it. That's really what I wanted to do. A lot of it was preconceived. I think,
Mm,
I was infatuated with the idea of being a doctor at that point. And, but I'm glad I realized where I was at as I was going through that part of my life, and made a course correction there, because I could, I honestly think I would be that physician who, after 10 years in the game, was really frustrated and probably not happy with what I was doing and have to look somewhere else. So I feel like I overcame or jumped over that part of my life where I probably would not have been very happy.
Yeah, yeah. I think I talk to so many people who have spent 10 to 15 years building this career that they never really want, right? And it's just different.
Yeah,
How you show up is
it
different
is.
too as well. And I'm so curious. You mentioned something that I thought was very interesting. So you mentioned that you seen how long or how far your efforts go in helping people made you feel satisfied. And I'm just so this is Aby's kind of tidbits, but I'm so curious if that's also why you wanted to be a doctor too, right? Wanting to help people. I
Yeah,
don't know if you've
I
yeah.
think that was probably tied to it. In my
Mm,
mind, I wanted to help people, and that was a way I felt like it would be really impactful. What the dots I didn't connect was the amount of really study and commitment, and not that there's not those things in the cybersecurity world. It's just in a different facet, right? It's focused on different things, and things that, to be quite honest, I discovered I wasn't passionate about. And I continually tell people that I mentor and talk with, like, you need to find something that you're passionate about, that you
mm,
like to do. So when you go to work every day and it is chaotic and the house is burning down and things are on fire, that you can still, at the end of the day, be satisfied with the job you did and not dread having to come back the next day. When you're caught up in a career or a job like that, it's not only not fulfilling. I think it affects you mentally, it affects you
mm.
physically, it affects all aspects of your life. And so, um, I speak to people really about finding what they're passionate about and trying to make their career based on that. And it may be that you don't get the compensation that you dream of, or it may be that from those aspects they don't meet up what you are. But I tell people all the time, you'll be infinitely more successful in life and in your and happy when you're doing the things that you want to do every day.
That is so true. That is so true. I think we underestimate the amount of energy that it takes to really be in something that you don't want to be in, what you're going to have
Right,
to do to overcompensate that negativity that's coming in, right? So
right, for sure.
amazing. There's something you said, Steve, that I want to go a little bit deeper there. So you mentioned the expectation of, being in cybersecurity as, always on, always on.
Right.
And for somebody within your role where you're having to deal with not just clients, but you also have your team to manage and all of that. How do you handle the pressure that comes with being in that position?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I still struggle with that today, because when you are passionate about something, a lot of times you invest even more time and effort into it than you realize, until you get to the end of the day. You're like, you know, um, I work remotely, as many people do, and one of the challenges I have is actually turning off. Right, I'm on all the time, and you look up and it's 10 o'clock at night, and you're still working on something, or trying to fix something, or trying to provide service for something. It's got to be, and I have been. Luckily, my wife helps me there a little bit. So many times she'll yell at me and, like, "What are you doing?" That sort of thing. Hopefully, people have a little bit of guardrails or boundaries there. Um, but I also think, you have to be very self-aware of those things and take time to go do the things that get you out of that situation that causes the pressure and stress. Like, it's not, as I mentioned, it is always on, but it doesn't mean you have to be always on all the time, right? There, if you're part of a team that you can delegate pieces to, or take time during the day to go out and take a walk, go out and take in nature, go do something that really that gets you away from the situation that's causing the pressure and stress. And you can't do that just one time. Eby, I'd say what people have to do is schedule that throughout the day. I've blocked out scheduled time on my calendar each day for things like what I call focus time, or times for me to do other things. I'm sure this doesn't happen just to me, but I have to block out lunch, because if I don't, people actually schedule meetings and things for me during my lunch time, right? And even still, it still happens. But it's really more of a reminder for me to actually say no, or push back and
Mhm.
take the time to go do what I need to do. Because what you don't realize, it's hard for me to realize many times, is that you can't be at 100% and doing your best quality work when you are stressed, tired, burnout. They use that term loosely there, but you're dealing with so much that you can't rationalize or put things in a structured order. It really requires you to be very self-aware and to take the time away to say, I'm just going to step away from this. Even if I'd say even if it's for 15 minutes, it at least gives your brain and your body a chance to readjust and come back and be refreshed and renewed to handle what else is coming up, or the issues of the day.
Wow, that was so well put, Steve. I've just got to give that to you. And I
Thank
love
you.
how you really mentioned the fact that you cannot be your best, especially in this line of work, right? You cannot show up making those decisions to protect organizations if you're stressed out.
That's right. Yeah,
Amazing.
it's very true.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. Like, have you encountered scenarios where you've had one of those days where literally people have booked your lunch and booked you back to back, and you've felt the impact of just having those days? Like, how did you move through that? Because I know there are people listening right now that are just having that, and they're wondering, well, how do I do this and how do I do that? Yeah.
Well, I think first you've got to be willing to say no and push back. I mean, I think, and uh, that may be that may appear differently for different folks depending on how they react or how they interact with their coworkers or other people around them. I think, for me, and that's a challenge for me. It's hard for me to say no. And that's part of my personality, who I am. But what I've realized, especially as I've gotten older, is it is okay to say no in the proper context, right? I mean, so maybe somebody books my lunchtime, which, as I said, happens all the time. I've gotten comfortable pushing back and saying, this is my time that I'm eating lunch, or I'm taking a break. Can't meet at this point, but I'll be glad to put you back. Find another spot for you to go in and try to meet at that point. Now, if this is something that's an emergency, or maybe there is maybe something that's on fire, and you just know that you've got to press through that, and it's a requirement for you to be a part of. I always look at, you know after that time's over, scheduling time for recovery. So maybe it's the next day, you take a couple hours, you start work a couple hours later, or you focus on something that you are really passionate about or like to do during that time versus turning back on to work. I've done a lot of instant response in my background. And so that's one where I know, as I'm running a team of incident responders and we're in the middle of an incident, those times, those can goes on for days and weeks, where you're really running at 1,000 miles an hour and you're trying to get everything fixed. I always tell the folks that I work with, like, when that's over, there's got to be a recovery period. Like, you can't go from one of those directly into another one. And as I said before, be successful, be at your best and your highest quality. So one is, you got to be able to say no, and understand how you can add context around that no. And two is, I think you do have to really book out times, or specifically schedule times for you where you can step away. And when you block those times out, really hold yourself accountable that you're
Mm,
going to take time away from that. That is the other piece too, is you kind of got to make an agreement with your own self that, okay, this time is for me. I'm going to take this time and I'm going to go do what it is that helps me recharge or get away from the stressful situation. A lot of people who struggle with this are like me, where they're very pleasing. They don't want to say no to people. They want to try to be helpful in whatever situation. And I still go back to that point. Like if you're burnt out and you're stressed and you've been running for 18 hours straight, you're not going to be helpful in that situation, and you might actually be hurtful based on you not being at your best or your highest quality. So there's a rationale that I go through in my mind, and I'm sure other people do, where you just have to say, I need some time to step away and take time for myself. And I would say as well, things like this, Eby, like having a conversation with someone and just talking through that, I think is a great therapy, if you will. Hopefully you won't charge me for this, Eby, and you're not going to send me a bill for therapy. But
no, it's on the
I do
house.
think, yeah, great. Well, I do think these kind of conversations with other folks that are in your industry, they're doing the same thing, their challenges. So get in a peer group, rant in a peer group, or let people know, hey, how are you challenging this? I think in the community of cybersecurity, it's one of the things that's really helpful is there's a lot of people. You're not going through this all by yourself. There's other people going through the exact same situations, and getting in a community where you can voice your stress and rant to other people. Sometimes they'll give you ideas to use yourself, and sometimes just doing that process helps you relieve some of the stress and kind of step away from where you're at.
Steve, we have hit so many points that I just want to take a deep dive. I knew this was going to be an interesting conversation, you guys. I told you. So there's so many layers to it. You mentioned community. You mentioned you pretty much leading by example and encouraging your team to have recovery, especially when you have those P1 or P2 incidents where you're dealing with day after day. And I think these are key points that needs to be highlighted, like from the perspective of you encouraging your team and they getting that permission from their boss, right? To say, it's okay. What do you think more and more leaders need to do to be able to feel comfortable, to be able to show that example to their team?
Yeah, I think if you're, and it is a great discussion, I think from as a leader, I've always heard the saying that, in order to lead people, you have to show them that you're willing to do what you're asking them to do. And so helping them understand that, there is a recovery time needed, that there is an availability for them to take time off, to step away from what's going on. I think it's real critical because in our industry, we have great, fantastic leaders and practitioners across the cybersecurity industry and community. And many people pride themselves on being really, really good at what they do and having really strong skill sets. And many times, in order to try to prove that, they're trying to be always on, or they're trying to do everything they can. And when you stack that on from both the practitioner level all the way up through leadership, you just get this big tower of people that are stressed out and always going, and nobody feels comfortable saying to someone, hey, I need a break, right? Because in today's society, especially I'm old school, and where I come from, if you told somebody you needed a break, you basically were admitting you're weak and you're ready to quit, right? I mean, and I think we've got to get past that piece and let people understand that it's okay to know that you've reached your limit. And when you reach your limit, it's okay to raise your hand and say, I need some help and I need to step away. I think if you empower your people and tell them, it's not just that telling point, you have to show them too. But if you can show them and be the first one even to say, you know what, this is getting, this is intense. Everybody's been on. Let's take a 30-minute break, step away and go do something. That, I think, breaks the ice for other people when they get to that place as well, to feel comfortable to say, I need a break. If they feel like they're going to be punished or there's some shame in saying, I need a break or I reached my limit, then you're going to push them over the edge. And so as leaders, I think part of that too is just knowing, Eby, it's knowing your team and knowing how they work and their limits. But being vulnerable and mentioning that, it's okay for you to take a break. It's okay to be reaching the limit, and even imposing those types of breaks during the workday or the activity that you're doing, I think is important.
Wow. And I'll be transparent with you, Steve. I've worked in IR too, and exactly what you said about the shame that comes with not wanting to admit that you've reached your limit. It's almost like this unspoken culture where you need
Yeah,
to put on some sort of like an armor to say, yeah, I've got it 100% all the time, 24/7.
right.
And I've had the privilege of working with leaders like yourself that said, no, you guys go take some time. And I cannot tell you how much the team appreciated that. Even if they didn't say that to you, I promise you they remember that.
Yeah.
And part of that example, that leadership example that we're talking about goes a long way. I think also in building your credibility as well as a leader. And I don't know if
Yeah.
you've experienced that too in terms of how leading the way that you lead has continued to help you to want to stay in the industry despite all of the stress that comes with that.
Yeah. I think people, to your point, and I think you're right, Eby, there, it gives the leader, it gives the leader trust and credibility from their team because now they realize that it is okay to be vulnerable. It is okay to step in that world where you say, I need a break. And I think that's that is part of leadership, right? Is knowing your team, establishing the trust with them, having their back and supporting them towards getting the overall ultimate mission that the team's focused on goes a long way. I've seen, and I think it's two sides of the coin there, EB, as well. I've had people on the team who I knew were not built for things like IR, even though they come on board and say, at worked in an organization where I led several teams and somebody wanted to move from a regular support team to the IR team. I knew this individual and I told them in the beginning, like, this is a different work style, right? It's different. You've got to pace yourself. There's a lot going on, short time frame, and it's chaotic, right? It's unorganized. I think you're going to struggle here. That person, no, they reassured me like, no, I want to do this. I'm going to do it. Let's go into it. So I allowed them to do it for a month. And then after the month, we had a touch point again. And I was like, okay, tell me how you're feeling, where you're at. And they were like, you're right. I don't like this. I can't be successful here. And so we moved them back to the other team. But I think giving people the opportunity to say, you know what, there's opportunities for you to do things here. This is what the work looks like. I'm going to have your back, and I'm going to make you. I want you to be successful, right? Because when you're successful, the entire team is successful. When they understand that what you're doing is the best, not only for them but for the team as a whole, I think that really you allow people to be very transparent and very vulnerable in discussions, and that's what you really need. As we try to put up the facade that we all have, that we're Superman and we can do all things and we can work 24/7, for people to really understand what their limits are, be self-aware, and then have a leader that will support them in that, goes a really long way for people understanding how they can be successful, how they can stay in the industry. And maybe it's not IR, but maybe it's some other faction of the industry, because cybersecurity is this broad industry. There's so much in it, so many different work styles. Part of that is people understanding where they fit in and where they're comfortable, and that's where they focus.
Amazing, amazing. And what really shines from those points that you made is you having that self-awareness to even have that conversation with your team and say, hey, this may or may not be for you, which means that tells me and a lot of people listening that you pay attention. Yeah, you pay attention. And I want to talk a little bit about that too, because one of the things that um, I've heard from cybersecurity leaders and that they have to deal with is you have so much budget to work with. However, you're expected to do pretty
Yes.
much everything, like don't get
Right.
breached, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so being a human being with this and a lot of things to do, how is it that you're still able to make space to be able to care and lead your team while still meeting the business goals for the organization and making sure that cybersecurity is aligned?
Yeah. I think that goes upward, right? I mean, culture and the idea that we care about cybersecurity and we care as an organization, it really has to go from, the practitioners all the way up through mid-level leadership and all the way up to ultimately the senior leadership, to all the way to the tip of the spear to the CEO or whoever's leading the organization. That theme has to be prevalent and saturated throughout the organization. So people understand that it's just common nature, part of their behavior, that they're going to try to be security champions and look out for their organizations. And that comes from everybody, not just the people in the cybersecurity departments of the organization, but in sales and in marketing and in finance and all those folks. You have to permeate that culture and that behavior throughout the organization. Really the only way you can make it. If you have in an organization of any size, Eby, I'd say if the cybersecurity practitioners are the only ones that care about cybersecurity and they're given a budget pushed off to the side and just said, hey, don't let us get breached, that I would exit that organization as fast as I could. I mean, I would be running toward the door there. And that's really what you have to have is support up and down the leadership chain to make sure that as you're telling your team, hey, I'm invested in you, I'm supporting you, we're trying to do everything that we can to make sure you're better and we're better, you're also hearing the same type of things from your leadership that's above you. Because the idea, and let me just say as well, in the cybersecurity industry, we have to get out of this idea. We have to break out of the idea that people have magic bullets and they'll never be breached and it won't happen to anybody. That's a falsehood, and people need to understand, I think, in the industry that, and while it's still prevalent, for me as a CISO, I have no doubts that if our company's security scorecard was breached, my CEO and myself will be having a serious conversation about what my future looks like. Right? I know that's probably pretty relevant or commonplace in most organizations. In my opinion, the idea isn't if you're breached, because we should all resign to the fact that that's going to happen. Now, I'm not saying it means we should lighten our defenses and not do what we're doing. What I'm saying is our focus shouldn't be on so much of how do we stop a breach from happening. That's relevant. That's factual. We should do that. We need to focus just as much on what happens when a breach happens. Like, what is our response? How do we respond to it? That's the area where I see a lot of cybersecurity professionals not focusing enough time on. And at the end of the day, as you see the media stories roll by of companies that have been breached, what stands out to me is when those companies are transparent and they say, hey, we made a mistake, or we had a tool that didn't work, or we had somebody who did something that was not right. But here's what we're going to do to fix it. And here's how we're going to recover on it. We had plans in place. We were already thinking about what would happen to a breach. And so the impact was minimal. And we're adjusting, we're doing lessons learned and moving on. I think it's really important for us as an industry to start thinking about how we interact with each other, our customers, and the data that we have, and how we protect and how we make sure that when and if an incident happens, we respond in a very professional and a very expected way for our customers.
Yeah, so focusing more on, yes, you want to prevent, but have a plan to respond and appropriately too, because you will be judged by that much more.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And Steve, there's another aspect that you mentioned that I wanted to just kind of bring to light. So you talked about if a data breach occurs, the CISO is usually the one that gets pinned. And I was reading this article from RSA where they talked about chief scapegoat officer. I don't know if you saw that,
Yeah.
but they made an interesting point. And I've actually heard another cybersecurity leader say this to me. They say the difference between a CISO and other C-suites is no matter what happens, it's almost damned if you do and damned if you don't. And what they were saying was when nothing is happening, they're questioning your relevance. Why are you here? Why should we give you money? And then when something happens, they're asking you the same question. And so at every point in time, there's literally no space for you to feel almost kind of like at calm and at peace with your role. It's literally having to justify your existence regardless of the
Yeah.
situation. And how do you deal with that? Because there's a lot of senior leaders that are struggling with this, and many of them have been wanting to leave the industry.
Yeah, and it's something I hear as well. So I talk to peers. One of my favorite memes, Evie, is that meme. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's a picture of three beds, and it's got the first bed with the CEO in it, and he's snuggled up asleep, and the second bed's the CFO, and he's snuggled up asleep, and then the third bed is the CISO, and that bed's made. There's nobody in the bed, right? And that is kind of the idea, I think, for CISOs is you really have to be passionate about what you're doing, as I mentioned earlier before. But I think it is an unfortunate sign of the times that we're in right now, where the CISO holds all responsibility and all accountability around cybersecurity and when an incident happens. And I'm not arguing that they shouldn't. What I'm arguing is that the support on the other side of it to make sure you don't get to that spot, as you mentioned, wanes over time, especially as organizations get comfortable with the idea of, hey, we've got really good tools and processes in place and we're safe and nothing's happened. And why am I spending all this money, right? I don't need to spend all this money. What's it doing? The way you handle that is having really frank discussions with your C-suite and your leadership so they understand that the reason there is a calm right now is because we've invested in the tools and the people that we have, training, doing incident response, tabletops, all those sorts of things that help prepare you for when and if an incident happens. We've done that, and it's not a one-time thing. It's not you pay for it this month and you have it for the rest of your life, right? It is continuous and it's ongoing and it's never ending. And you really have to make them understand in the terms they speak, like ROI, revenue, resiliency, the things that they understand affect the business. You've got to translate what you're doing to them so they can see the value. And when they don't see the value, that is when they start pressing on those questions like, hey, why are we spending this money on training? Or why are we spending this money on this tool? Why are we spending the money on this resource that we have here? They're very expensive resource. And that's the translation that really the CISO has to tell. I always think, as I tell other peers, the CISO's really got to be a storyteller, and more so maybe than anybody else in the C-suite. You got to tell the story and make it relatable to that diverse audience on a board or that is part of your leadership, why it is you're doing what you're doing, how it's bringing value, and if there's a problem, are you gonna take accountability for it, and what are you going to do to make sure that we remediate the problem, we act quickly. That is a lot for a CISO to take on. Let's just be honest. And that's why I see a lot of peers who are moving away from the CISO role and moving back to individual contributors or moving back into other practitioner roles in organizations, because it is overwhelming. But I don't have an answer for it. I'd like to see the industry as a whole, though, move into a place where CISOs have more direct input on the at the table of what happens in the business around, budget, what happens around resources, what happens around how we prepare for incidents, and the responsibility the rest of the leaders have in that. And that's just it's a long runway. It's a lot of conversation and change that has to happen in the industry. At the current state we are right now, you mentioned, chief scapegoats about right. You see right now when an incident happens, typically the CISO's gone the next day or pretty quickly after that. And, to be fair, that maybe the CISO may have played a role in that. And most times I see they probably don't, right there. It's an individual issue that happened down below them, and there were controls or processes in place that just weren't followed or were broken or something like that. And at the same time, I'll say that if you step into the role and take it, you have to understand the risk and the consequences that come with taking on the CISO role. People view you as the owner of all cybersecurity risk, and in some cases, all risk, period. And if a risk is realized, unfortunately, where we're at today in the industry is, they think replacing you with somebody else reduces the risk, and we obviously know that's not the case, right? In any case,
Yeah.
that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's this weird interplay of needing someone to blame, but even though
Yeah.
we all know that that's not going to solve anything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's this is so interesting, Steve. This is so interesting. And another aspect to this, and I think you brought it up, is it's community. And I'm so curious, like from your perspective as a community, because I think in the InfoSec community, we're pretty strong, right? We do tend to have a certain
Yeah.
kind of way of thinking, right? And it's one of the reasons why people would want to choose to enter this industry in the first place. But what do you think community can do in terms of building um, resilience, like human resilience now in its practitioners? Because when we talk about resilience, is usually technical resilience, the
Right.
tools
Right.
and all of that stuff. As a community, what can we do for ourselves?
Yeah. That's an interesting question, and I'd say um, there's two sides of that equation. I think one is me as a practitioner. How can I make sure, especially with things that are happening in the industry? I think we just saw that CrowdStrike laid off a bunch of folks, and tech companies are. This is the season, it seems like, after RSA, where layoffs happen and rifts happen and things like that. As practitioners, I think we become resilient by expanding what our knowledge and skill set is, and not becoming a one trick pony. Meaning, not we're just an EDR person or we're just a cloud person. I think it takes a breadth of knowledge, and so what I would challenge people on doing is really making themselves of value to companies where you can be plugged in any type of situation, and and you're a good outcome for that company. And so you got to be current, you got to be passionate, you got to be willing to learn a new technology and to take on the accountability for the place that an organization puts you in. And speaking from a company who does hiring in that space too, when I see practitioners that in interviews, and I look at candidates as they are presenting themselves as passionate about cybersecurity as a whole, they want to learn, and there may be places where we all in the industry wear different hats, but you're willing to put on another hat and learn more stuff and spread yourself out to become more valuable to an organization. I think that's the way the industry is going, right? The idea that we're going to hire these very siloed people in one specific place to be to do to make one widget is becoming outdated as the landscape changes. I think that's one place. On the organizational side, is I look to make sure I'm more resilient because I've got practitioners who may want to leave and may want to go somewhere else, or may find a role that they think is better for them. I always look at a couple of things as I'm leading a team. Is one of the things I'll do is stack rank my team, right? It's not, no disrespect for the team, but I know on my team who's the A player and I know who's the D player, right? And that can change. It's not a one-time assessment. I do it based on their passion, how much experience they've got within the tool set and organization we have, how committed they are to learning more skills and moving themselves up, how collaborative they are with their team and with other teams. All that I look into making an idea in my mind of the folks that are really utility players and A players across my organization. And then I start thinking about a succession plan for each one of them. And I have them participate in it. And it's not the idea that we're going to fire you tomorrow, but it is the idea that, hey, you might find a job that's better for you, and that's great. That's fantastic. I want to enable my people to be the best version of themselves, whether that's with the company on my team that I'm leading or with another company. But what I need to make sure is if they make that personal decision to move on, that it doesn't negatively affect me and my team and the organization. So succession planning there, I think, is really important. And that's the idea of what skill sets do you bring, and is there somebody else in the team that could step in your role, or is there what would be a good replacement for you for a new person that's coming in to fulfill your role if you went somewhere else? So I think there's two sides of that, as I mentioned, Eby, and I think you've got as a leader leading a team as part of an organization, and as a practitioner, there's things you should do of planning and preparation ahead of time to make sure you are as resilient as possible.
I love that, because I think one of the, especially in cybersecurity with succession planning, I don't think a lot of security leaders are proactive enough, right, to engage in how to forecast where their team
Right.
is going to be years from now. So I love
Yep.
that you're even doing that right now. And one of the things, as we come around to the hour here, one of the things that I want to hear from you, and I'm sure the audience will want to hear, is we've talked about a lot, Steve. We've talked about
Yeah.
we've talked about the
I've run my mouth.
resilience.
You're being nice to say, Evie, that I've been running my mouth a lot, but
Oh,
yeah,
Steve,
I like to talk. So anyway.
this is exactly why I reached out. This is exactly because we love people like you that are just vulnerable and authentic and just call it out. And I think everyone appreciates that when they listen and hear what you're saying. And from all the wonderful things that we've talked about, being able to um, manage the stress and being able to almost sort of change the culture of being Superman and Superwoman, and then
Mhm.
to having to be tuned in into your team and understand, where their strengths are, to succession planning. How is all of this, including, of course, the CISO role having so much liability and accountability and whatnot? How is being in not just your role, but being in cybersecurity, how has it shaped your life in general?
Hmm. Wow, that's a deep philosophical question there, Evie. I think, I think there's been I'll be transparent again. I think there's been some very positives from it, and I think there's been some negatives from it, right? I'll start with the negatives, because those are easier to call out sometimes. The job is demanding, right? And having a support structure around you to make sure that when you are working in IR and you're working for 3 days straight, I mean, straight on an instant trying to help it, that your family can continue to go on, and you have a support system around you that can encourage you and make sure that you don't get stressed from your job and then step out of that and get stressed from your family life or your support structure because you weren't there and you were absent, right? And I think that negatively me early on in my career. I didn't trust my support structure, and many times missed out on things that went on in outside of work and life because I was so focused on work and so bought in, and just, I love that idea, and I use that all the time when I talk to people about being Superman or Superwoman, right? We think in cybersecurity world here, we're going to swoop in and we've got to be the one that solves all the problems. And I lived in that mentality early in my career. And that negatively affected me and my family, I think early on, until I got to the place where I understood, as you grow and you experience things and you have some of those kind of inflection points in your life where you're like, okay, something's got to change here. That can't keep going this way. So, that's a negative spot. I think also there's some negative connotations in the cybersecurity industry about how uh, how unloyal, let's say, the community is in some roles. You have a lot of people that move from one organization to another, to another, to another. And I, and that's part of, I guess, my generation, where I came from. Where I came from, you went to work for a company, you stayed there for 30 years, and that's where you retired. This industry and this generation is much different, and I think negatively, as I interact with people outside the cybersecurity community, they're judgmental. I'll say, whether right or wrong, they're judgmental on, oh, you've been with these 3 companies in the last 2 years. Wow, what's going on? Blah blah blah. It's almost an indicate or judgment on who you are, your character, and that sort of thing. And I think that's a little bit of that's one of the things negatively that you have to make sure that you stress the people you talk through about what it looks like in this industry. From a positive standpoint, I'll say again, cybersecurity is something I'm passionate about. Technology, I love it. And so positively, what it's let me do is, even during times where I've had stress and had all those other issues going on, I'm refreshed each day when I get up because I'm passionate about what I'm doing. Like, I can be as stressed as I can be at the end of the day, and done all the things I've tried to do to de-stress and take stress away. But you had a long day, let's say, and a lot of stuff going on. I can go to sleep and get back up in the next morning and be refreshed, knowing I'm going back to do something I love and really like to do. And that's been a positive on my whole life. I think overall, I think the cybersecurity industry is also it has afforded me to make relationships with people in various walks of life and various industries. And that's something that's really been helpful for me and a positive in my life. I've talked to people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, and all industries in situations where they're in dire needs and they need my help to help protect and defend them, or incident response or something like that. Or some folks that are in really good spots and they're just trying to prepare for what's going on. So relationships are built under different stresses and different circumstances, and I think that piece is a really positive aspect of the cybersecurity industry. Is you can meet people who, we may be a community that's aligned in what we do in a mission, but you get to see people that approach that mission from different perspectives and different ways, and honestly different importance to them based on what it is they're doing in their lives and where they're at.
Amazing. Amazing. So Steve, I don't know about you, but I feel we can keep going on and on and on for 2 to 3 hours. But I have a final question for you, and this one is might take you a little bit of a timer to think. But if you had a magic wand, and there was one thing that you would like to change or see in the cybersecurity industry, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a deep one. I think a couple of different ways I could approach this, Eby, but I'm going to go with I'm going to go with the idea. I think if I could wave the magic wand and fix anything, it probably would be to I think it probably would be to give everybody the superpower of being able to impress upon their own bosses or their own teams, their own, let's even take it out of work, even your own families, on how important our data is and how important it is to secure that data. And really, for me, that would be a huge step for us as a nation and as an industry. We've become so, I think, desensitized and so numb from breaches and how often they're happening. And, people get those credit monitoring letters, in the mail. Hey, you've been breached. Okay, you get a year's worth of credit monitoring. Great. We've become, especially as generations have changed, we've gotten to a place now in our history where, we'll give our social security number and phone number and something out to an app on our phone like that, right? And with no really concern about what happens to that data, where it goes, or what the company's doing with it. And I really wish we as a nation, and maybe as a world even, valued that data more so than what we do today. I think that would just listen to my rationale here, Eby, as I talk through that. That would help inform so many decisions for companies as they went forward. A lot of the strife and stress that we all face as practitioners is just trying to shake people and make them understand, like, this is important. We need to worry about this. We need to have things in place to take care of our data and take care of our organizations from a cybersecurity perspective. And while I think the industry has made great strides in becoming more aware and teaching awareness, I still think we've missed the mark tremendously on laying out how important data and data security is to everybody, our families. Our kids have grown up where like I said, they'll give their data away to anybody, anywhere. They don't treat it as a valuable asset that they own. I think that's a change that I would make.
Love that. It almost kind of reorienting the mindset of people in general towards data security.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that while that may seem nuanced or not seem as, that's probably not the answer you're looking at, Eby. You're looking at me to give you some answer that would solve all the world's problems. I just think I just think that mindset change and that shift towards of value of what we have and what we hold would actually solve a lot of our problems, because we'd be much more um, protective of that data, where we put it. And then breaches have much less consequence, much less impact, because we're protecting that stuff. So we take the responsibility on ourselves to protect that data, versus I'm going to worry about who I'm giving the data to protect it. You know, you want to make sure they're protecting it, but you really don't know, and it's going to stop you from watching some streaming channel or streaming show on TV. So you're just going to give them everything you got. And I think that piece would help us reorient how we think about cybersecurity in the future.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And I agree with that 100%. It all starts, again, it goes back to, all starts with the person, the human, right? You
Yep.
choosing that.
Right, exactly.
Amazing. So Steve, this was, I don't know, usually after sessions like this, I like to look for one word to describe it. And I'm struggling with picking one word, because when, we agreed to do this, I had no expectations. And this is what I love about it, because when you come in and you meet someone and see them for who they are, you get to learn so many facets. And I just want to use this time to appreciate you and just everything that you've been able to share with us. There's a lot of germs that I know people are taking note right now, and people are going to utilize in their lives, especially leaders like yourself. So I just wanted to say thank you for your vulnerability and just, being comfortable enough to be able to share these lessons with us.
Sure thing. You enjoyed it and appreciate it. And I hopefully it does help somebody. It's impactful for them. I hope so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, so we're just coming towards the end of the hour here. Steve's details are going to be placed in the description box. So if you guys have any questions for him, Steve, is it okay if they reach out to you?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Okay.
Happy for them to reach out to me. Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. So feel free to reach out to Steve. But other than that, we're going to close today's session. And thank you again, everyone, for listening in. Steve, just hold on a second. And if anyone has any questions for me, of course, you guys know how to reach out to me. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.